From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Amarachi Ubani.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, President Muhammadu Buhari extends lockdown in Lagos and Ogun states for one more week. Imposes 2-week lockdown in Kano State. Lawmakers set to resume tomorrow and Wednesday. Upper Legislative Chamber, the Senate resumes plenary on Tuesday, April 28th, even as the lower house gets set to resume legislative business. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says logistic challenges impede Nigeria's ability to conduct 50,000 tests daily. Confirms activation of COVID-19 test labs in Kano, plus 2 more labs in Zaria and Sokoto. And global COVID-19 cases pass 3 million mark as death toll rises above 200,000. Plus business and news from Abuja, the FCT, and later from our studios in London.
Tonight, Moody's Investor Service reverses outlook on banks in Nigeria and 2 other African countries. And that follows impact of coronavirus and falling oil prices.
And on sports news tonight, FIFA proposes allowing teams to make up to 5 substitutions per match to help players cope with a return to action after COVID-19.
And from Abuja, it's an all clear for Tinubu and his wife after their aides test positive for COVID-19.
President Muhammadu Buhari today extended the COVID-19 lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and the nation's capital, Abuja, for another 1 week, with an indication that a phased and gradual easing of the measures will begin on Monday, May 4th. He's, however, added Kano State to the list of states on lockdown with immediate effect for the next 2 weeks. There will also be an overnight curfew from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., which will from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., which will start from Monday, May 4th, while all movements will be prohibited during the period except essential services. According to President Buhari, the decision is in line with the recommendations of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, the various federal government committees that have reviewed socio-economic matters, and the Nigeria Governors Forum. This is the 3rd time the president will be addressing the nation since the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus in Nigeria.
However, this will be followed strictly with aggressive reinforcement of testing and contact tracing measures while allowing the restoration of some economic and business activities in certain sectors. Furthermore, new nationwide measures are to be introduced as follows. A. There will be an overnight curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. This means all movements will be prohibited during this period except for essential services. B. There will be a ban on non-essential interstate passenger travel until further notice. C. Partial and controlled interstate movement of goods and services will be allowed for the movement of goods and services from producers to consumers. And D, we will strictly ensure the mandatory use of face masks or coverings in public, in addition to maintaining physical distancing and personal hygiene. Furthermore, the restrictions on social and religious gatherings shall remain in place. State governments, corporate organizations, and philanthropists are encouraged to support the production of cloth masks for for citizens. For the avoidance of doubt, the lockdown in FCT, Lagos states shall remain in place until these new ones come into effect on Monday, 4th May 2020. The Presidential Task Force shall provide sector-specific details to allow for preparations by governments, businesses, and institutions.
We'll open discussion on the president's speech shortly, and we'll be joined by the West Africa lead of the Ford Foundation, Mr. Innocent Chukwuma. With the extension of the lockdown in Abuja, Lagos and Ogun, the inclusion of Kano on the list, it's obvious that the residents of those states now have one more week to wait before they probably get back to life as normal as they know it. But the lawmakers in the Senate say they will resume plenary on Tuesday, April 28th. That's tomorrow. A clerk of the Senate, Nelson Ayowo, announced that the upper chamber of the National Assembly plenary will begin at 10 a.m. Ayowo, however, noted that aides of the lawmakers would work from home but would be notified when needed in office. The statement comes days after the House of Representatives announced it would resume plenary also on Tuesday. Apart from lawmakers who are resuming duties tomorrow, and with some conditions, there are indications that there may be some slight changes in some other parts of the seat of power. Our State House correspondent, Kayla Megwa, speaks on the situation in the nation's capital and what to expect after the president's speech.
Hi, Amarachi. President Muhammadu Buhari has basically answered a lot of the questions on the minds of Nigerians with this speech. Economists had argued that it is impossible to sustain a total lockdown indefinitely in any country. And President Muhammadu Buhari has responded to that by easing up the lockdown. But he has talked about some of the benefits that the lockdown has had on the fight against COVID-19. More testing, more cases, more containment in many parts of the country. Now, this particular easing of the lockdown is going to be a week from now, and we're seeing that he's going to be watching interstate travel is going to be restricted to essential services. We're also seeing the movement of goods across states, which is good for farmers. The idea is to ensure food security. And he also talked about Kano, says more help is coming to Kano, but the place has to be on lockdown for the next 2 weeks. So we're going to be watching how that unfolds. There are still many other questions, Amarachi. One of them being the fact that will our land borders still remain shut? Will the airports still remain shut? We didn't hear him talk about that. With the relaxation of the lockdown, are we going to be seeing the resumption of some activities like the Federal Executive Council meeting, for instance? Or is the country still going to be run remotely from the presidential villa? Are we going to be seeing the visitors that we normally see coming into the country and coming to see President Muhammadu Buhari at the villa as it used to be before? So those haven't been answered yet. And then most importantly, the airports. This interstate travel, will it affect the airports? And of course, we'll be watching to see how this relaxation of the lockdown impacts the war on COVID-19. Back to you, Amarachi.
Thanks a lot, Kayla. Lots of questions there. Now, a total lockdown will commence in Bayelsa State from tonight. Governor Doye Dire's new declaration gives special consideration only to essential workers, pharmaceuticals and foodstuff sellers, as they have been exempted from the lockdown. This development follows the confirmed index case of the coronavirus in the state. The 49-year-old woman presented herself at the Bayelsa Specialist Hospital in Yenagoa with a history of poor appetite, fever, headache, cough and chest pain for almost a week. She also has a history of hypertension and diabetes. She, however, denied having any history of traveling outside of the state and has vehemently rejected the test result. The governor says the government will not reject the results of the test. It was scientifically done, and she presented herself for testing. Now, the Presidential Task Force did continue its briefing today in the nation's capital, Abuja, with a hint that logistics is a challenge impeding potential to test 50,000 people for COVID-19 per day. The Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Dr. Chikwe Hiekwazu, says there are currently 15 activated molecular laboratories across the country with at least 50,000 test capacity per day. But sample collection in many states remains very poor due to lack of logistics. This and several other comments formed the discussions at today's briefing.
fight against COVID-19.
It's exactly 2 months since Nigeria recorded the index case of COVID-19 on February the 27th this year, and 28 days of presidential lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory.
Members of the presidential
At this news conference in Abuja, the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 gives progress reports on their activities at the weekend.
Over the last 4 weeks, we have made appreciable progress, but we are not yet out of the woods because a lot more is required to be done. Nigerians at all levels must take responsibility for our actions, adopt behavioral modification, ensure compliance with adversaries, and provide guidance to our followers and the youth.
Also of keen interest at this briefing is the issue of multiple deaths in Kano State, a development that has left so many questions unanswered.
There are concerns about the steep rise in the number of persons diagnosed with COVID-19 in Kano State. You sadly included members of the State Emergency Operations Center, along with reports on a reported spike in the number of deaths over the weekend. The federal government, through the Federal Ministry of Health, is deploying a high-powered fact-finding delegation to work with the state to improve COVID-19 response, as well as ask questions on the causes of these deaths reported.
We're also working very hard to investigate the causes of the deaths that have been reported. Now, mortality surveillance is not easy. So we're working to do what we call a verbal autopsy retrospectively and prospectively, together with the public health team in Kano. That is very diligent work that is going on at the moment, and in a few days or a week, we'll be able to produce the initial results.
Away from the issues in Kano, the lack of logistics is also impeding Nigeria's potential to test 50,000 samples per day.
What we have in the moment in the country as we speak is a capacity to test about 50,000. This is with the conventional RT-PCR and the new Roche equipment that we have launched today. So in every new lab comes a new opening for challenges around logistics, collection, travel, transport when there are no flights going. So people have to actually go by road through all the multiple checks. So I just want to assure everyone, we are trying, but it's not easy.
In just 2 months of its outbreak in Nigeria, COVID-19 has spread to 32 states plus the Federal Capital Territory, exerting so much pressure on the nation's weak healthcare system.
2 more COVID-19 deaths have been confirmed in Kano State, bringing the total number of deaths in the state to 3 from coronavirus. It says, however, not part of the mysterious deaths recorded in the state, which the state government insists is not linked to COVID-19. Meanwhile, Governor Abdullahi Ganduje has directed the State Ministry of Health to carry out verbal autopsy of those who lost their lives to the reported strange ailment in the state over the weekend. He's also drafted a combined team from the State Ministry of Health and the National Center for Disease Control to 8 local government areas in the state to perform the autopsy to determine the real cause of the deaths. Well, since the first case of coronavirus in Nigeria, this is the 3rd nationwide address by the president on strategies and national policies to fight the novel coronavirus. Let's take a look at the timeline, though. His first speech was on March 29th, 2020. 2 weeks later, the president made another appearance where he extended the lockdown after a month in Lagos, Ogun, and the FCT. And then today, the president gave another address. So the cases have been growing since then, as you can imagine. From the day of the president's first speech, we had 111 cases and only 1 death. 2 weeks later, it's risen exponentially. from over 100 to 343, and 9 more people dead. Today, the confirmed cases have grown way over the 1,000 mark, and 30 more people dead compared to 2 weeks ago when the president extended the lockdown order. The efforts to curtail the COVID-19 has been multifaceted, but the impacts and implications have been quite enormous too, especially on the economic side of things, particularly on our economic mainstay, which is oil. Let's take a look at the global price of Brent crude oil, which will invariably affect our earnings and our revenue. From a month ago, when the president first addressed the nation, the price of oil was $19 a barrel, coming from weeks of a drop from as high as $50 per barrel. It then went up to $21 as the second address of the president, but has since dropped again back to $19 per barrel. In part 2, after the break, we're being joined by the West Africa lead of Ford Foundation, Mr. Innocent Chukwuma, to analyze the implications of today's broadcast by President Muhammadu Buhari. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. President Muhammadu Buhari extends lockdown in Lagos and Ogun states for 1 more week, imposes 2-week lockdown in Kano State. Lawmakers set to resume tomorrow and Wednesday. Upper Legislative Chamber, the Senate resumes plenary on Tuesday, April 28th, even as the lower house resumes legislative business, also on Tuesday. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says logistic challenges impede Nigeria's ability to conduct 50,000 tests daily, confirms activation of COVID-19 test labs in Kano, plus 2 more labs in Zaria and Sokoto. And global COVID-19 cases pass a 3 million mark as death toll rises above 200,000. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. Some lawmakers from Kano State and the House of Representatives are calling for urgent intervention of the federal government and the NCDC to curb the health challenge in the state, which has resulted in over hundreds of deaths. The lawmakers make their request known through the majority leader of the House of Representatives, Ado Dogwa, after a closed-door meeting in Abuja. According to the House leader, the meeting was also to allow members to arrive at a common front on presenting the matter before the House of Representatives when it resumes on Tuesday, April 28th, for possible parliamentary intervention. They say the situation in Kano State cannot be handled by the state government alone.
Any matter of this nature affecting Kano State, it is generally affecting the northern part of the country. That is why we think the federal government has to do something so robustly urgent. The federal government would have to do a kind of very proactive intervention, like it did in other states. You have a state like Kano, so populous, is locked down, especially in the city, the ancient city, where the aged, the young ones, and the women are now jam-packed into very restricted home vicinities. You certainly will expect a lot of commotion. Meningitis is there, possibility of malaria is there, suffocation is there, social trauma and demoralization is also there. I want to, in essence, say that we need an urgent intervention. We need a robust intervention. We need a constant constant surveillance from the NCDC and from the Federal Republic of Nigeria as a government. Otherwise, the case we have in Kano certainly will be very alarming and demoralizing.
We'll now continue with the president's broadcast earlier today, where he extended the lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja. Now, Kano, we're joined on the news at 10 by the lead of the Ford Foundation, Mr. Innocent Chukwuma, as we review the president's broadcast. Thank you for joining us here on the news at 10.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope you do feel well, and you have been coping with the lockdown also. So what do you make of the president's speech? There were lots of anxieties about what the president was going to say tonight. I'm not sure it went the way people hoped it would.
I think it was a very welcome speech, very sensitive to the mood of the nation, a pleasant surprise to many, including me. And it showed that the president actually listened to the various stakeholders that have spoken in the last 1 week, calling for a significant modification of the lockdown policy because of the severe impact it was beginning to have on the economy and the livelihood of the people. And he touched all the both things. He praised the frontline workers. He admonished law enforcement officials not to engage in abuse of human rights, exempted Kano, that Kano required a significant lockdown to deal with the situation there. So for me, he hit all the right both things. A few areas one would have liked him to touch, but I think in general, well, I thought he should have harped a little more on what the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 said earlier today, which is the under-declaration by some states and some state governors of the rate of infection in those states. The inability of some states to actually take advantage of the lockdown period to significantly prepare, even if their states have not been affected. It was only a matter of time because this is a virus that is going to travel before a vaccine is found. So, but in general, I really like the speech.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much the virus, people have contracted the virus, considering that, Lagos and, some major states have also imposed a lockdown and restriction measures. So it's just amazing how much they have spread. But how do you see, the new changes made to the lockdown, especially, as they will be modified from May 4th? How do you think Lagosians especially will respond to this, as well as people who are in the other states in the country, with the president giving governors powers now to go ahead and modify as much as they can?
You see, I belong to a think tank on COVID-19 that was set up by ANAP Foundation, and we meet weekly to take the pulse of the nation. We have contact from across the country that reported to the meetings, and the general message was that the lockdown needed to be significantly modified. So that's why I welcome it, and I think majority of the people out there would also see it that way. However, a lot still needs to be done in the area of the guidelines, how detailed it is, how prepared the states are as we go into the period of allowing businesses to reopen, in the period of allowing people to move about. Will they observe the social distancing? Will they wear the face masks that was talked about? Who will produce the state masks? It is the same people that have not earned livelihood within this period that will be expected to purchase the face mask. And also, when you tell people to wash hands with soap, we forget that in many of the public places that people meet, you don't have pipe-borne water. Are they going to sink boreholes and provide tanks and soap so that people who are coming into market or business areas will take advantage of them? And then the other one is the level of obedience that Nigerians bring to issues like this. I must say that our level of discipline needs to be improved upon so that we know that this is really a life or death matter. Government relaxing the lockdown doesn't mean that we should go back to business as usual. So it really calls for all hands on deck. The government needs to do more at various levels, state, federal, and local level. Public spirited individuals, philanthropic organizations need to come in to support, to make sure that all that needs to be in place before May 4th is reasonably achieved, so that we can have a situation where we won't go, because some people were talking about earlier today, Ghana, after a week of relaxing, within the last 24 hours, they've witnessed 270 fresh infections,
and
that's
I think
beginning to scare people whether that would indeed be the case here.
Yeah, and then that's a point people also need to remember, that even if you have survived the virus, you do not develop immunity against it. Thank you again, Mr. Innocent Chukwuma, for being here on the News at 10, and do stay safe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mohamed Atiku Abubakar, son of the former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, has been discharged after 40 days of treatment for COVID-19 at the isolation center in Abuja. The former VP's son, who tested positive on March 23rd, 2020, says he is now being cleared after testing negative. The young Abubakar is full of thanks to the doctors and nurses who treated him, and pleads with Nigerians not to lose hope in the country, saying despite the limitations of the health system, the Federal Ministry of Health and Nigeria's Center for Disease Control have done tremendously well. Meanwhile, the former president, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, is calling on stronger economies and international agencies like the World Health Organization to support the efforts of African nations towards procuring the necessary equipment and kits to fight COVID-19. Dr. Jonathan is also appealing to international financing and donor agencies, as well as creditor nations, to consider granting economic palliatives, including debt relief, or placing moratorium on repayments to help weaker nations cope with the economic difficulties brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. He recalls that when Ebola hit Nigeria and some other African countries in 2014, under his presidency, Nigeria was able to effectively contain the spread by adopting proactive measures that ensured effective collaboration between states and the federal government, as well as mobilized support from the civil society, private sector, and the international community. When the News at 10 returns, we have more updates on coronavirus in Nigeria. Plus, Moody's Investor Service reverses outlook on banks in Nigeria and 2 other countries following impact of coronavirus and falling oil prices. That will be on Business News. Join us again. Welcome back to the News at 10. Let's head over to Abuja now, where Linda Akibe is standing by with more on the News at 10. Hi, Linda.
Hello, Amarachi. Welcome to Abuja. Taraba State Governor has confirmed 2 more cases of coronavirus infection in the state. This is coming after Governor Darius Ishaku had earlier described as shocking the confirmation of 6 cases of the virus in the state. Governor Ishaku adds that contact tracing of index cases has commenced with the deployment of additional resources and manpower.
I wish to assure the good people of Taraba State that this is not a time for panic, as government is on top of the situation. Additional manpower and resources have been mobilized and deployed to trace the contacts of all those that have tested positive to the coronavirus immediately. It is quite unfortunate that the reported outbreak came about despite the robust proactive steps taken by my administration to prevent the virus from entering our dear state. Fellow Tarabans, let me assure you that we are prepared, having already identified 2 treatment centers located at the State Specialist Hospital Jalingo and the Federal Medical Center also in Jalingo.
From Taraba, we move to Lagos, where the former Lagos State Governor and national leader of the All Progressives Congress, Bola Tinubu, says he and his wife, Senator Oluremi Tinubu, have tested negative to COVID-19. This is coming shortly after his chief security officer died from the virus and another tested positive. Tinubu also confirmed that indeed coronavirus is real and cautioned against stigmatizing people who may have been stricken by the virus. The statement says the rest of the staff are negative. The one staff member has been isolated in accordance with NCDC guidelines. Further contact tracing and COVID-19 tests are being conducted by the NCDC with regard to the relatives and possible contacts of that staff member. And from Lagos, we move to Kaduna State, where the state government has blocked its border with Kano as part of measures to contain interstate transmission of COVID-19. The state government says it is putting in place the needed measures to stop the spread of the virus, especially at a time when Kano State has been battling with reports of mysterious deaths in the state. The state task force team on the enforcement of a lockdown also intercepted several trucks laden with passengers, but disguised to be carrying foodstuff. Staying in Kaduna State, Governor Nasir El-Rufai has directed all senior government appointees in the state, including commissioners, permanent secretaries, special advisors and heads of agencies, to each donate 500,000 naira starting from April 2020 as their contribution in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic in the state. The governor explains that the extension of the quarantine conditions by another 30 days imposes an obligation to make provision for the low-income, poor and vulnerable persons that would be adversely affected as they may be unable to earn any income while the lockdown persists. He further directed that the political appointees will subsequently donate 50% of their salaries until the quarantine ends. Career public servants earning a net pay of 67,000 naira and above after tax would also donate 25% of their pay monthly while the quarantine conditions are in place, adding that no public servant will have less than 50,000 naira monthly to manage in this emergency period. And that's all from Abuja. Back to you, Amarachi.
Thanks a lot, Linda. And here, just as the president made that announcement earlier this evening, the president signed the proclamation order on the general management of COVID-19 in Lagos, Ogun, Kano, the Federal Capital Territory, and other states in Nigeria, as contained in his national broadcast. The president's in a statement says this is an exercise of the powers conferred on him by Section 3 of the Quarantine Act, Cap Q2 laws of the Federation 2004, and all powers enabling him in that behalf. The president today, as we remember, announced an extension of the lockdown order in his nationwide broadcast and what he says will be a gradual easing of the restrictions on the economy. The Lagos State government says it will broaden its partnership with the private sector to improve health etiquette and take steps to curtail the spread of COVID-19 in the state. Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Environment, Belinda Odeneye, said this today at the flag-off of the second phase of its decontamination and disinfection of surfaces and public places in Lagos. The exercise in partnership with Rekid Benkista, DeFortune's Pest Solutions and Clino was carried out in Ketu and Ikorodu areas.
Combat ready against COVID-19 with a concentrate diluted in huge tankers to fiercely fight the virus. These men, specially selected by health and safety organizations, say they are determined to wage war on the pandemic. The mention of the virus seems to terrorize many as the Lagos State government announces a compulsory use of face masks. But that perhaps isn't enough. Private sector involvement has become crucial, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Environment tells me.
We've got Julius Berger giving us the equipment. We've got Rekit and Benkiza, Medlog, Logistics, and some other people, Cleanall, so many corporate bodies supporting us with chemicals to make sure that a lot of places are covered.
We soon filed out on a convoy of 4 tankers, all containing the mixture. Speedily down the highway, as if every life in Lagos is at stake. The team from Rekid Benkista, makers of JIC, Clean All Nigeria Limited, DeFortune Pest Solutions and others all agreed that COVID-19 can be defeated at the community level where it's currently prevalent.
This is going to be able to at least disinfect and take away any pathogens like COVID-19 from all those surfaces. And then this is a step towards getting our cities safer.
The ongoing exercise, which started over 3 weeks ago, proceeded last Thursday at the Ministry for Environment. And now, continues here in Ketu area, where people have defied all measures against the spread of the virus. The exercise, however, is definite, with one aim.
Contact time is 20 minutes. That's why we're using so much water, so much solution of disinfectant and water. We're disinfecting all the bus stops and flyovers, all the way from Ojota to Ikorodu. That's what the program is for today.
The spray is intense, catching some unaware. Despite warnings, they disperse in an instant. But soon cluster again. 4 bus stops on the long stretch were disinfected, including 2 major pedestrian bridges in the heart of the area, giving way to conquer corona.
Let's check in to the world of business. Here's Kayode Okikiolu.
Thank you, Amarachi, and you're welcome to Business News. Global ratings agency Moody's Investors Service has changed its outlook on Nigerian banking system, South Africa as well as Morocco, to negative. In its latest statement released today, Moody's explains that the rating is attributed to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and oil price slump, which could cause banks' profitability to fall under pressure. The rating agency expects Nigerian banks to face weak loan quality and foreign currency liquidity, while banks' asset quality in all 3 countries are expected to deteriorate amid slow economic growth this year. And on to labour matters, the International Labour Organization is asking for improved stimulus packages for the vulnerable and workers in the country, and that's due to the possibility of job losses and increase in poverty level. Speaking on our Business Morning show, ILO's Country Office Director for Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia and Sierra Leone, Dennis Zulu, says that the COVID-19 pandemic will take toll on remittances of Nigerians abroad, which most of the vulnerables depend on.
We actually commend the steps that various governments have been taking, including Nigeria, in the short term. But I think in the long term, we also need to be looking at how certain policy measures can be put in place to ensure that the economy springs back into life as soon as COVID is managed. So that's very critical. Another important thing that's not talked about much is the fact that the global economy is well linked. And one of the statistics which are quite worrying for countries like Nigeria, which got $24 billion as remittances last year, is the fact that all those Nigerians who are working abroad and remitting this very important money to their relatives back in Nigeria will not be able to do so because, again, they might not be in employment, or if they're in employment, the hours of service has been reduced, so they're not able to send money back home.
Well, a total of 600 million naira has been donated by brewing giant Nigerian breweries, and that's part of its efforts to support the fight against COVID-19 in the country. In a letter signed by its managing director, Georgie Bell, the foremost brewer says the total amount donated comprises of a 250 million naira cash donation to the federal government through the Coalition Against COVID-19, CACOVID, 250 million naira cash donation to 7 state governments' task force against COVID-19, which are Lagos, Ogun, Kaduna, Oyo, Enugu, Abia and Imo, as well as 100 million naira worth of various relief materials. According to the official, check presentations have already been made to Lagos State and Ogun State government, while other states will receive their donations in the coming days. Meanwhile, Mr. Jordi Bell says the company has taken various steps to ensure continuous job protection for its 3,000 employees, while supporting its vendors and suppliers during this difficult time. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Stock Exchange begins the last trading week of April slightly higher, and that's after investors sustained their interest on Tier 1 banks as well as the shares of MTN Nigeria. Bisi Adebayo has the details of Monday's performance.
Hello and welcome to the Stock Market Reports. It's a fairly good start to the week at the Nigerian equities market as investors gained an additional 8 billion naira, pushing the all-share index to 22,616.28. Today's gains can be attributed to the sustained investors' interest in MTN Nigeria and some Tier 1 banking stocks, which of course drove that sector up 1.12%. There were also some activities in the oil and gas sector, thanks to a marginal rise in the share price of Owando. Nigerian Breweries was the topmost loser for the day, while Lasaco Insurance topped the gainers chart, contributing to the largest units of the total volume of transactions, which settled at 108.12 million, estimated at 1.3 billion naira. And that's it on the stock market reports. I am BC Adebayo.
Well, thank you for watching Business News Tonight. I am Kayode Okikelu. The news at 10 continues with Amarachi.
Thanks a lot, Kayode. Still ahead on the news at 10, global COVID-19 cases past 3 million mark as death toll rises above 200,000. And more from our London studios and around the world in 5. Stay with us. And the main news again, President Buhari has extended lockdown in Lagos and Ogun states for 1 more week, imposing 2-week lockdown in Kano State. Meanwhile, former Lagos State Governor and National Leader of the All Progressives Congress, Bola Tinubu, and his wife have tested negative to COVID-19. That's the news at 10 tonight. Thanks for watching. I am Amarachi Ubani. Good night and stay safe.